Awesome. Welcome everyone to Generator's Emergency Response Program webinar on HR, payroll, and tax implications. We are going to have one of our major program sponsors, mAccounting, one of the VPs there, Johnny Walker, walk us through some of the ins and out of some of these topics. So before we get started, just wanted to thank you guys all for joining us and remind you that all of these webinars are going to be posted online, and we'll share the link to that at the end. If you are having trouble with your Wi-Fi or having trouble connecting on your desktop, you're always welcome to call in. Sometimes people have better luck hearing that way. So here's a dial-in information. And then questions we'll be doing at the end. So Johnny will walk us through a presentation about HR, payroll, tax implications, cash flow planning. And then at the end, my colleague Jeff is going to ask questions. So as long as you can type them in the Q&A box, we'll do our best to answer all of them on this call. And then any unanswered questions we'll send to Johnny afterwards and make sure that you get the answer to your question. But just make sure you don't enter them anonymously so that we know who you are so we can get them back to you. And then if you have questions after this webinar that you think of later, you can send them to jeff@brandery.org and we will make sure they get answered for you. And then the last thing before we get started, we are unable to field all of the technical issues just due to the amount of people that are on the webinar today. So any technical issues, unfortunately, we won't be able to solve, but we are posting all of these webinars online. And again, we will share the link with you so you can go back and watch this for reference or if you had trouble connecting. And with that, I'm going to introduce Johnny Walker, VP at mAccounting, to walk us through some of these new laws.
Great, thank you very much. You guys can hear me okay?
Yep.
Yep, wonderful, great. Well, thank you very much indeed for the introduction and very pleased to be here today. So let me just bring up the presentation, excuse me a second. And do we have that coming up correctly?
Yep, looks great.
Okay, super. Right, well, yeah, thanks for everybody's time today. As the introduction there, I'm going to go through some other aspects around cash flow planning and payroll, thinking about the expenses of your business, and also alternative sources of financing. As I'm going to cover, this obviously is in the context right now of coronavirus and the stimulus funding that we're seeing from the government. I will make this point again, but what I'm going to cover here are complementary steps and strategies you can take in the business alongside the opportunity to go and gain access to that funding. So I'm going to come to that, but I just want to be clear, I'm not going to go through the COVID-19, the SBA loan application and like that. We have other resources, many other resources that we can get to for those details, but these are the other elements that you should be considering alongside that access to funding. So just a little bit on us, because you know the name mAccounting, very well known in the sector. We are actually all part of a group company called Indinero, and I happen to be originally from Temp CFO, based in New York, and we've done a lot of business in the venture-backed startup scene, providing outsourced accounting and CFO services, and we are all now part of the one family of Indinero. But you'll see the other brand names there. Account Keepers is focused on North Carolina principally, and Nomad Financial is actually based in New York as well. So we have all this access to resource. We're one integrated company across the board. Everything's standardized in terms of work papers on the accounting side. Access to CFO is available to every single client of the group. So we have a lot of clients that are leveraging CFO services from other parts of the organization based upon where we can route the best expertise through to the client base. So that's us. We do have quite a spread of locations, obviously on the East Coast and Midwest, and then on the West Coast as well, Portland and San Jose and LA, and then the East Coast, you'll figure out the locations there. So we're spread across the country. The accounting staff, the actual controller and staff accounting resource is based principally in Portland, San Jose, and Indianapolis. Those other locations then are where we have access to CFO support dedicated to dedicated face-to-face relationships with clients. And we do have other, LA and New York have accounting resources as well. but the principal main offices are Portland, San Jose, and Indianapolis. So just on clients, this is just a list of some of the clients that we've had in recent years. Is actually we obviously have done rather a lot of clients, being what is now essentially quite a large company. Socio and Woven, I think, are two companies that you may more familiar with locally, but some of those names you may well be familiar with on a general basis. And each of these we've done a variety of different services. Some are accounting only, some are CFO only, some are integrated. We've done NetSuite implementations for them, etc. So, and we've got engaged with them from a lot of time, from very close early on in the growth of the company, sort of seed stage, all the way through, not necessarily through exit, but certainly through Series B, Series C sort of stage. So that's our sweet spot. Okay, so that's the introduction, and just give you a sense for where we're coming from. In terms of the topics today, these are the 7 categories we're going to go through. First couple sort of focus on, you're going to take some steps right now that are about managing cash and making sure that you've got that extended runway and you know where the risks are, and try and think it through what that decision framework looks like if certain events come to pass. So that's the first 2 sections we'll talk about. Second one, staffing, and of course, we're an outsourced provider, and that's something that you can think about as an alternative to current staffed activities. And then there are various sort of considerations you want to make sure, both in terms of how you think about your current staff and employment. I'm going to advocate getting in touch with your lawyer straight away with a lot of the decisions you might take there, and then outsourcing some of the key ways, or frankly, as we know this environment of outsourcing so well, some of the key things it takes to make an outsourced relationship successful. I'm going to come back and harp about communication throughout, so I just happen to have it here. We'll go into it in a bit more detail, but communication is important across all your stakeholders so you keep everybody up to date. And then fundraising investment has by no means slowed down at this point in the economy. Many investors who were around in the even back to the 2000s, and certainly 2008, will know that the best investments were actually made at the near the bottom of the economic cycle. So it's the good investors, or very good and capitalized investors, they're looking for opportunities. So it's not the case of all bets are off right now. And then lastly, I'll go into cash flow forecasting. It's something I referred to at the start, but I'll just show you some aspects of a couple of templates and some do's and don'ts as regards cash flow forecasting. Okay, so cash flow planning, the financing cash flow planning. So in terms of cash preservation, no question that that what you need to do from the top down is, as it says there, take immediate action. You want to stop and find and stop the bleeding of cash, and unnecessary bleeding of cash. And you also don't want to have certain activities unless you're really sure as to how they relate to an ongoing sort of stability for the business. You don't want to be acquiring new expenditures as you go, so hence the hiring freeze. It's the easiest thing to enact. You just say, cut it, this is where we're at, we're going to stabilize at this point. And then you go through, and often just going down the income statement is the best way to identify where expenses are going, and just take a look at each one and try and figure out, do you really not need that expense anymore? And some of the things that really are a benefit, to ongoing, employee happiness almost, are things like the benefits they might get access to in an office, whether it's office meals or snacks, that kind of thing. I mean, it sounds small, but if you take the attitude of trying to find every single cost, then you will uncover not only the small ones, but you'll uncover the big ones as well. So have a very detailed eye on that as you go down your income statement. Look out, it's not everything that's an expense. Ultimately, it will be an expense, but not everything from a cash expense ends up on the income statement. So there might be some other things that are prepaid, that in terms of the way it works in your financial statements. So look really hard at where the cash is going as well. I'm going to say this again, I just mentioned it, say it again, but the communication, we'll come back to that topic. And then on the staffing side, again, lawyers are going to be such a key resource for you early on when you think about staffing, and how you can plan around risk and what's needed, what isn't needed, and how you might actually plan for those cuts or furloughs and things. Very easy and very necessary thing to invoke or to create early on is a cash flow plan. And again, I've got a couple of templates at the end I'll show you, but it's pretty simple. You just want to look at what the cash inflows are and the cash outflows. The bank statement, frankly, most companies will have 1 or 2 bank accounts. You can look at that, you can get a very clear idea pretty quickly. Here's where all the cash is going. And you just put together a plan that says, here's what we expect to spend on a weekly basis going forward. And you need weekly. It'll matter at some point. And there's so many things that have, weekly granularity. Payroll, for example, is once every 2 weeks or mid and end of month. You want to have that weekly granularity and clarity around it. So that's an important thing to get in place. And by all means, ask your accountant or financial advisor. If you've got somebody on your board that's acting as a CFO, get them. Maybe they've got a resource that can help put this together. All that said, you want to be, as a CEO or senior exec in the company, you need to know the ins and outs of that cash flow plan. So you know what's in there, what assumptions were made, why numbers are in there, what's the basis on this cash flow. So you've got to make sure you understand that, even if you get somebody else's help to do it. Definitely from a cash preservation, this stimulus program, in fact, I think it was only yesterday or the day before, they're announcing a potential 250 billion addition of loan financing available. So there's a lot of stimulus coming from the government right now, and it is practically universally accessible. So there's a couple of programs, which again, like I said, I'm not going to go into here. There are a lot of resources out there online. I'm sure the team here is getting you some resources that you can access. The EIDL, the Paycheck Protection Program, is we're seeing a lot of activity in that right now. It is designed to help get financing for you to keep people on staff, so you're not laying off people. It's the whole intention of it. And then you will be able to, the government will forego a portion of those loans related to keeping those people in employment. So it is to some extent free money, and it is not that laborious to actually apply for it. It's hectic right now. Different banks are at different stages. The SBA may managing to process some things more quickly than others. It's definitely a bit of a mess, but it's a massive stimulus program, and you need to get your application in there in order to be in the mix. There is a webinar that we did last week, Thursday. It's on our blog, blog.indinero.com, if I spelled that right. And you can get, there's a slide deck there, and the webinar was on Thursday, and literally as we were doing the webinar, the Fed and the Treasury was releasing more from sort of updates and things. So you got that as a go-to, but there's other resources out there that will have even more regular or recent updates to it as well. And definitely feel free to give us a call in terms of loan application processing. Your banker is a key contact, but we can help make sure that your materials and the calculation of payroll, eligible payroll expense is actually correct as it relates to the currently understood criteria. So definitely we're a resource for that as well. In accounting, Donna's a key contact, and we'd be happy to help. So that was cash preservation. Contingency planning. Here, what you need to have some framework whereby, let's say you've got a customer, very sizable customer, that you're dependent upon that customer placing a deposit payment or some kind of pilot program payment, and that's going to help fund payroll for the next 2 cycles. You got to figure out, well, what do I do if that customer, for whatever reason, cancels the program? So you'll have various events. You'll be quite easy to identify what those events are going to be, and you need to have a thought ahead of time. Well, what would I do if that came to pass? And so this contingency plan is saying, well, if I get these big impacts in the business, what am I going to do, and where am I going to think about pulling back on expenses, and unfortunately probably pulling back on staff as well. And so putting that thought into those hypothetical situations, which unfortunately turn out more likely to happen than ever thought possible before, but you need to go through that. You need to think carefully and in an organized way about what steps you would take. And that planning, again, it's like what we say about business planning. In essence, it's not the plan itself necessarily that is the most value. It's the fact that you went through a thinking process and you understood, okay, here's the things that are connected. Here's where there's a a tangential activity that really is a bit sort of loosely connected to everything. By going through those thinking processes, you're going to be much more able to make decisions on the fly when the events do happen. But still, a contingency plan of some sort is very, very important. You definitely want in here to think through all the options. There are a number of our clients who are doing that compensation reduction. We've even done some of that ourselves in terms of how you might pull back on expenses, just as a way to manage cash in the short term. So there's definitely options, a lot of options there. Some are much more complex than others, and some are very easy to enact. So do a good review. Talk to your accountant, talk to your lawyer about ways in which you could reduce in some of these expenses. Okay, so staffing. That really, I'll cover two basics. And again, I'm not going to go into great detail here, primarily because the employment law consequences around it are significant and obviously dependent, of course, on the state that you're in as well. So I say this at the end, but I'm just going to say at the start, consult your legal team. This is your go-to for helping figure out the consequences of any particular action and help you understand what the resulting costs would be of any of these decisions, because it's not just a case that gross salary stops. There's severance. You may be tied to providing or need to provide outplacement service. You may, and as I say down in the relevant costs, it's not just salary, but it's also the benefit side as well, and how you're tied to providing benefits through continuation of health insurance and COBRA, whatever. There's a lot of legal complexity there, and you want to make sure you've got that legal support on your side early to determine, what are the actual full-in life cycle costs of making these decisions. But you do have the opportunity to reduce staff by a reduction in force or a layoff. It's permanent. The staff are essentially going to leave the organization, the severance package, and then you may have other costs related to that. And then the furloughs really what you're saying there is you'd like to just take a break from paying somebody. They can take a break from working from you, but the expectation is they'll come back after a period. Of course, there's no guarantee. They may find another job in the interim. This market right now is not a great market to find another job. So it's probably a fairly safe route for companies to explore. But it just consider it as another option in that case. And again, just the salaries, don't just think of it as a saving there. Think about what benefits cost is going to continue to be after the point of laying somebody off, or what you've got to do in terms of furloughs as well, and get in touch with your legal team. Outsourcing. So here's, if you do get to that point, you look at the company and think, well, here's how I can cut staffing. There may be some essential services where it's easier or it's possible or viable to get a particular service or process handled by an outsourced firm. And I think this is how I broke it down in terms of where you might find those opportunities. It's really key up front. If you're going to take the risk of outsourcing, and it is the risk because you're reliant upon that vendor actually doing a proper job for you, that you can rely upon their credibility, skill set, reliability, all that stuff. I'd say first up, whatever you think of outsourcing, make sure that outsourcing provision is an established business. So outsourcing something new where there's new entrants into the marketplace, you're opening yourselves to risk, because that dynamic of outsourcing that activity may not be really understood at that point. So stick to, I think, just from a risk mitigation standpoint, to things that, have been in the market for a long time. So we've been doing this for 20 years. My boss, the founder originally of Attempt CFO, he would say back when he founded the firm 20 years ago, he had to first convince people that outsourcing accounting was possible. Then he had to convince people that he was the best person to do it. So you had two-stage sale. And here, you just want to be going in and tackling providers that know how to do a very established outsourced vendor provision. So I'd say that outright, just because it's reducing risk for you guys. Find the stuff that's non-core. I look back at accounting. Accounting for most businesses is really non-core. It's something that can be outsourced, and you can get it done. You can leverage the expertise, you can leverage capability, and frankly, resource to get jobs done. So look at that as to how you can get you can identify various processes and work that can get done outside. You used to say that with outsourcing, it's kind of implicit that there's then, you're gonna have to do this remote. Well, the advantage right now is everything's happening remote anyway. So at this point, outsourcing something is possibly not very different to the way that you're having to operate at this current point in time. So there's actually a benefit in that, as opposed to a normal course operation where most companies are largely on site in an office, and to think of outsourcing is quite a substantive change in the way that you're working and the processes that you're using. From a success standpoint, I say when we bring clients on board that one of the dynamics that we focus on making sure is going to be really robust is that communication link between the point of contact internal at our client, at your companies, and then at our resource, our accountant, if you like. And because the effectiveness of our job is entirely reliant upon how well that communication works. So just think of it with you guys, if you're going to outsource something, who's going to be the internal point of contact, and how much do they know and understand about their outsourcing dynamic and how to manage that provider, so that things can go off the rails if people don't know what they're doing. So just make sure that you've got a good solid point of contact internally. It may even be yourself, in that which case educate yourself on what that provider and the outsourcing nature actually is. Definitely make sure, if you understand, if it's offshore, a lot of providers will present what is effectively like a thin veil of US presence, and then before you know it, all your work is getting done in a different country, possibly with a substantially different time zone. And so turnaround time on work can be radically different to what you expected. So ask questions. They need to tell you if they're going to take your work and put it somewhere else offshore. Big time zone impact on most things. In order to find providers for outsourcing, get recommendations. So I say every single time, even people who find us online, I'm like, go and talk to some people who've used us, because that's the best way for you to identify that we're the best partner for you going forward. So get recommendations. Will be for established business outsourcing. There's going to be people that know recommended providers for it. And I said at the bottom, some of the contractor platforms you can look to leverage. Be very careful. They do work. It's specific. I think more of things like marketing design. If you need to get something designed on a very low cost basis, then those platforms can be great for that, or some other documentation or scripting or something. So those are my general recommendations as it relates to outsourcing and how you might find ways to save money. Because the save money opportunity is not only just in a normal economy with growth happening, like we save money for our clients, but just right now you need to save every cent. Okay, so I mentioned it before, the communication side. I'll just go through these quickly. It's the key point here is you just communicate with everybody, because there's no reason not to. Your customers, you've got to tell them what's going on, but also because you want to understand what they're doing. And the more that you're making sure there's a clear communication link with them, the more that you can find out what pressures they're under, what might help them, which also in turn might help you. And that's that kind of attitude towards customer relationships only creates better relationships for the long term in any case. And so that I made the point down there, focus on building trust and transparency, particularly key in all of these, but certainly with customers, you need to feel that you need to get to a point where you understand what's going on with them and they understand what's going on with you. And the out of the box thinking, there might be some ways that you can crack a deal with them to in terms of providing services in an ongoing with an ongoing business. How could they pay you some money up front that might ease some of your cash flow restrictions in terms of a discount on service overall? There might be some clever things you can do to help alleviate your cash pressure and still keep like a customer contract going. So definitely communicate regularly and frequently with them, identify them, prioritize them, etc. Vendors, I got off a call with one of our clients earlier today, and she was very frank, and she said she's talking to all the vendors and she's just asking them, what can you do to help? Here's my situation. And that is, I can't recommend that approach highly. They are an extremely trusted client of ours already, and that only served to increase the trust that we've got with them. So you doing that very open thing to say, well, call my vendors, what can you do to help me through? We're all in the same boat here. We're all going to be better if we just figure out a way that's more flexible and productive and constructive for us all. So that, call the vendors up, just ask them what they can do for you at this point. Employees, you got to keep people on track. You still need work to happen. You need everybody to feel motivated and to understand where everything's at. It's a responsibility of management to keep employees up to date. And there really isn't any reason not to be as honest as possible. And B, that's the trust and transparency. It comes back again. And I think keeping people up to date regularly with what's going on is going to be a safer, more manageable route on the long term, and just keep them informed on the health of the business overall. And the banker financing partner, coming to it last, it's not that there's any order of priority here. They're all high priority. That's a source of financing. And the bankers right now, fantastic relationships. Huntington Bank in the Midwest that mAccounting knows well, phenomenal partner for our clients. And they know what they can do to help you. And the only way you're going to find out is if you call them up and talk to them. You tell them where everything's at. And so you'll get the best advice from them. You get the best options. They'll come to you. And there's ways in which they can do things that will help you out at this point. And it says the words are there. These are extraordinary times. It is a very unusual point in the whole economy in our history. Things are happening minute by minute almost. So the more that you're up to date and have a regular communication with your banker, the more that you're going to receive a benefit. So all these things are important. Keep the communications going. It's a lot of time, but it's going to benefit your business in the short term and long term. So the investment side, the keep communicating really applies to, don't assume that everything's stopped. You may well have been in the middle of a fundraising round, as the client actually earlier today was. There's no reason to stop communicating with your investors. They need to see how things are going, especially your existing investors. If you were expecting to raise more money from them or not, you just need to keep them appraised of how you're managing the business going forward. Keep that communication line open, be transparent about progress and what your targets are and how the plans have changed in the short term. If you're raising new money, those fundraising conversations that you're in the middle of are likely to be the ones that more likely to be the ones that might actually come through. So keep making sure that those conversations are going where possible. And definitely for either for existing conversations or trying to find new opportunities for investment, do search online, because there's a lot of those funds are, they've got money to place. They've got capital that they've secured and they can call down on, and most of the time that capital is somewhat available still, and they need to place that capital. VC funds are operating typically on a 10-year lifetime, and they need to get the funds placed in the first 1-2 years. There's money there to be invested, and these funds and angel groups are moving a lot. They need to find the deal flow. So if you can't meet them in person, you're going to do it online. And so various funds have open access pitch sessions that you can go and apply for. There's a lot of activity. It's ironically even more accessible now in some shape and form. There's less barriers to actually meeting these people because they need to find the right deals to invest in. And as I said before, this is actually an extremely good time to make investment. So there will be well-capitalized, sophisticated, knowledgeable investors will be out there placing money. So don't think of this as like a complete dearth of investment dollars. There is money there to be accessed and to be found. And definitely assume, just work on the assumption VC funds still have access to capital. They tend not to, it won't be upfront if they don't. So a lot of these conversations may feel that they're going somewhere and then actually won't, but that's just standard. You can't criticize the VCs for that too hard. But that, just bear that in mind. And the more experienced you are in talking to investors, the more you'll learn which conversations actually have a true opportunity of moving forward. That goes without saying that, of course, it's an investor's market essentially right now, and that is because the pressure, the need of financing is there for definite. There's probably reduced funds available in essence, and that means that there's a greater pressure down on valuations and so on. So the negotiation is in their favor. So just recognize that. But if you're going to run a business and want to get investment to keep growing, then the time is now, and the capital is accessible. I'd say that regardless of that, the timing, you can go out in the market, you say in a normal environment for the last 4, 5, 8 years, you could say that it was like, first money in the door from starting to raise a round of financing was 3 to 4 months, sometimes 6. Like you had these ways, and then there was typical rates and discount rates and convertible notes, or preferred stock sort of terms and conditions, etc. I would say right now that those expectations around timing and so on probably aren't going to be that relevant. They're not going to be so applicable because just everything's so much more in disarray right now. So don't think of those timelines as being really guiding you going forward. And that means then keep a major focus, aside from all this investment fundraising, keep a major focus on cash management. Make sure you've got that runway really understood, and you know how you're going to be able to extend it back to that phased contingency plan as you go through. If you don't get the investment in, what are you going to do? All this positivity around there being investment dollars there does not stop you from being focused on cash. Okay, so then just the last piece I was going to go through here was just to show you some templates and to-dos for doing the cash flow projection. Again, weekly, must be weekly. Don't bother doing monthly. You're only going to end up having to do it weekly at some point. It's easy to do. It's just a per column basis, and you can roll it forward. And it needs to be nothing more complex than what's here. You need to have a beginning cash balance. You have to add in what inflows there are, and then you have to take out what outflows you're projecting in each week going forward. Nothing more complicated than that. And you can do with actuals to your forecast comparison. You just take the native transaction data from your bank account, and through Excel or something you can do categorization, so then you can see what money actually went out in a given week. And that we always say that with any model that's a forecast, the validity and accuracy of that model only improves if you compare actuals to budget or actuals to forecast. So as you're going through, a week passes, what happened with cash? What did I think happened with cash? How should I change the forecast going forward to make it more accurate? That cycle, and that advocate here doing a weekly basis, it's easy done. You're not going to have too many transactions coming through the bank. You're going to get a better view for that forecast and better accuracy if you do that cyclical check-in and review of stuff. This is from one of our standard presentations on talking and capability. It just shows you, there's another template there, but point here I'd make is on the bottom right, lower right. By putting numbers in, you're making assumptions. And you want a way of recording what that assumption was as to why a number is in a forecast. And you want to be somewhat rigorous around that. So because you might be spreading this across a bunch of people. You might delegate responsibility for various portions of the cash flow management across to other people in the company. And they want to understand, well, why did you put in 120 for rent in August when I know, for example, it's going to be 180 or whatever it is. And that there is something that you want to keep that track of assumptions made very clear, so you understand, because you'll forget why you put a number in a certain place. And so keep that track of notes and assumptions throughout. Needs to be weekly. I think I've battered that one to death. Get a first draft done. It's easy just to knock this out, use the information you've got, make assumptions, and then start a revision process to improve the accuracy. You'll throw a number in there for, insurance, let's say. So then somebody's going to get an action to go and review the insurance contracts and make sure we understand exactly what you're paying for insurance. So you go get something down first and then start define actions that help improve it from that point onwards. Forget accrual-based accounting for this. This is cash basis. This is looking at the bank statement. This is looking at cash and ins and outs going forward. And again, track actuals against forecast and revise projection. Fundamental. It is the case that there's going to be some surprises. Some stuff's going to happen that you never expected. All you can do is work hard to minimize the likelihood, but there will be some. Just doesn't stop the importance of working hard to try and avoid them. And then to the extent that, this goes back to the communication side, there's probably some situations whereby you don't want to be completely open about the projection forecast. But if you've got people that you're relying upon to work in a certain way with the cash forecast, make sure you've shared the projections with them so you know what basis on which they're working. That's important to make sure that you've got that delegated visibility and that everybody's working off the same hymn sheet. Okay, so just last pieces then. So in terms of, if you're at this point right now, you're thinking, oh my God, customers disappeared, revenues dropped off the end of the cliff. I've got, 6 weeks cash left, I think. What do I need to do? Get that cash plan forecast together, weekly template, start talking to everybody that's a stakeholder in the company, has employees, vendors, customers, and investors. And then actually, so this is language that was from last week, don't attend the webinar later today because there isn't one. Go and review the one that was from last week, but there are more information that we can provide to you about the loan financing options. And the one that's not here, which really should be sort of towards the top, is review costs right now, stop any cash bleed that's going out the door. You can do that day one and make sure that you're not unnecessarily losing cash, which you could be using to extend runway. And I think that's it.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Johnny. Yeah, and it looks like we have a couple questions in here. And just as a reminder for everyone, as Jess shared, if you do have questions for Johnny, feel free to stick them in the Q&A chat box, and I'll relay them over to him. But the first one we have here is, what is the impact on exempt employees' salaries if you cut their compensation and they drop below the DOL regulation amount for being exempt versus non-exempt from overtime? How would this also impact the threshold for highly compensated employees?
That is a terrific question, and I'm gonna punt it because I'm gonna say that I can get an answer to you, but it won't be from me. I'll ask the team. That's into detail, which I don't want to throw out a possible answer, not knowing if it's correct or not. So let me get back to you, Mike. I'll circle that to the team, and I'll get back to Jeff with a response for you.
Awesome, sounds great. We'll see if we have anyone else here with any last minute questions for Johnny. Looks like people are already taking some of your advice there. A couple thank yous.
Yeah, and I'm happy, as you mentioned, Jeff, I'm very happy to have any questions forwarded after as well.
Yeah, sure thing. And then it looks like, yeah, so a couple just kind of last ones here. Mule asked, are there any templates that you mentioned, or you mentioned a couple templates that you walked through, or is there any way that these folks could access some of those templates?
Well, those ones there were just snapshots. We don't, I think if you did a search online, you're going to find that the basic cash flow template. I'm not sure. We might have one that's that's kind of one we just distribute. I can see what the team has got, but really it is essentially very simple. All you're doing is again the inflows, outflows. You have a starting to any period. You have a starting bank balance, and what's added, what's coming out, and there's an ending bank balance, and you just roll it forward to the next period. So I can see if there's anything that's a template that we've used on a repeated basis and share that out. But I'd say even just doing a basic search online, you're going to see a couple of examples and be like, okay, great, now I understand how to do it. And I advocate with something like a cash flow forecast, build it yourself, because then you know where everything is and why a number's in there. Don't think of it as a black box that you just pop some numbers into and trust the answer, because you don't know how it got to the answer. This is simple enough to be able to do.
Awesome. Yeah, Mule, we can touch base after as well and see if we can't help you find some of those templates on our end. And then it looks like a question from John on how rigorous some of the data needs to be in those formulas. It looks like he's made his forecasts and kind of curious just on some of the assumptions and the accuracy of them.
I mean, it's a gray area, because I think the smaller the absolute number, then the less important it is to be kind of less important is to be accurate on it, you know, because you'll find for small expense lines you just pop in a rough number. I think it gets to be very important if you've got certain estimates that are perhaps linked to customer activity, and you might want to have a way of thinking, well, what's my spend going to be on this particular material source or online cloud hosting if it's tied to customer activity. Like you want to be, and it's let's say 20% of your projected cash outflow in each given week, then it's going to be pretty important to sit down and think hard about how accurate that is. So I think it's a question of degree of relevance, and I'd argue work on everything to a great degree of detail. But if it's a small amount, chuck it in there, have an assumption, go and spend the time thinking about the bigger amounts that may be of much more consequence from a runway standpoint. So it's tough to know. I don't think there's any one single answer to that, other than put stuff down there. And again, it does actually go back to the actuals versus forecast. You're going to learn where your assumptions were wrong by comparing what happens with what you thought would happen. And then you're going to hone it from there.
Awesome. Well, I think that's all the live questions we have for you, Johnny. Thank you so much again for taking the time to walk everyone through. I'll mention it one more time here in the chat box. You should have access to, block off a little bit of time with Johnny if you're interested. If you have questions that we weren't able to get to, or, that you come across later on, feel free to send them over to me via email, and we'll connect with Johnny directly. And then the last thing that we'll mention is, we as the Generator and Brandery team are hosting these one-on-one free virtual meetings every day this week, and also leading into next week. So if you haven't had the opportunity to connect with us, we'd love to connect with you and see how we can help, and if there's anything we can do for your business. And then last note is we'll have one more webinar covering some mental health topics tomorrow at noon. So hopefully you're on that calendar invite. Hopefully you can join us tomorrow. But thank you, everyone, and big thanks again to Johnny.